I would like to welcome you to the NIA and NHLBI Entrepreneur Workshop Series. Today's session is Pitching and Promoting the Company. I'm joined by some esteemed colleagues here today. So I have Dr. Diane Ignar. She is the Entrepreneur in Residence at the National Institute on Aging at NIH. We have John Reinhart. He is the Entrepreneur in Residence at the National Institute on Aging. Ryan Wagner, Senior Vice President at Ogilvy Health. And we're also joined by Guy Mansueto. He is the SVP and Chief Marketing Officer for PartsSource. And I'm your moderator, Monique LaRocque Ashton, and I'll be facilitating the session today. So today, just to give you an overview of what to expect, we will have 3 unique segments. The first segment is focusing on pitching. Dr. Ignar is going to be talking a lot about the investor questions we've gotten and how to adequately prepare your pitch. Ryan and I will be talking about promoting the company, and we'll get into things like setting up your communications infrastructure. And then you'll also see a case study, which is a conversation with the Chief Marketing Officer, and there we'll welcome Guy and John to have that conversation. After each of these sessions, we'll have a Q&A period. Because we receive so many questions and we're really dedicated to making sure you get the answers you need, we're willing to stay on a little bit past the hour. So I'll just let you know that if you are joining us and you see that we're going past, you're willing, feel free to stay as long as you would like, but we're willing to stay depending on the questions that we get from you. So this Entrepreneur Workshop Series is something that we put together as a partnership between NIA and NHLBI. And the reason is that we really wanted to help the awardees not just get that initial seed funding, but to be successful in your business so that you can move from the research idea to the commercialization stage. And we know there's a whole lot that goes in between. So we've been doing these sessions throughout 2021. We're also going to continue into early next year, give you some more information on those. But we're covering select entrepreneurial topics. And the hope is that you'll apply them to your small business and then use that to better advance your business, to grow your team, and to be successful in getting the products to market. We have been recording these, and so you can go to our webpage and see the archived workshops. They can be found at the NIA Small Business Program events page. And beyond these conversations in the Q&A, we also recognize that you may need some additional support. And so we are offering 4 awardees of NIA and NHLBI one-on-one conversations with an entrepreneur in residence. So if you are an awardee, you can sign up for those. We'll give you some more information about that in chat. Also, if you are an applicant and you don't yet have an SBIR award, we will also share some contact information. That's a different type of meeting, and we'd be happy to connect with you as well. So just to look ahead on our Entrepreneur Workshop Series, we do have the next one in January. It's on investment funding. We've seen a lot of questions from you all on investing and how to attract investors and how to set up that presentation, et cetera. And so beyond what we'll talk about today, there'll be another part that you can join. So I encourage you to register today. We just posted that link to register in chat. And with that, I am delighted to welcome Diane Ignar.
Well, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. And thanks very much for attending. We certainly hope you're going to gain some useful insights to apply to your company's pitching and promoting strategies. If I have the next slide, please. So in this session, I'm going to be covering considerations for tailoring your pitch to your audience, key elements of a pitch deck, and then some style suggestions for oral and written presentations. Next slide, please. First you should consider why you're pitching. Are you needing to raise funds? Are you seeking strategic partnerships? Maybe you're simply trying to raise awareness with investors and potential strategic partners for the future. It may be a combination of these things. And you may also be able to seek feedback. For instance, if you're in one-to-one partnering discussions, investors and potential strategic partners can certainly provide advice on indications, technologies, and the data that's needed to generate interest from them. And the reason that you're pitching relates then to the outreach strategy that you'll develop. I'm not going to talk about outreach strategy today because there will be the workshops coming up in January and March. So could we go to the next slide, please? So you also need to consider who is your audience. Now, This means who you need to be pitching to at any given time. You may be at an investor meeting and speaking to a very broad audience that contains angels, venture capital, different strategics, but you need to pitch to your audience, the people that are the investors that you're trying to reach. And the reason for that is that the pitch deck approach may be different depending on the audience that you're trying to reach. So an example could be if you're developing a therapeutic agent with multiple potential indications, let's say as an example. If you're talking to a pharmaceutical company, or you're pitching to a pharmaceutical company, you can talk about the target and the asset or the medicine, and then the potential indications. Whereas a venture capital firm would ideally like to see that the company has done the work to already select the indication and create the development plan so that they can understand the costs, the R&D path, time to potential exit, and probability of success, and evaluate if they want to invest. So there may be the pitch deck may be slightly different depending on who the audience is. Next slide, please. And then you need to consider what you're pitching. And I think here, certainly there are companies that possess maybe a lead therapeutic program with some early stage assets behind, and maybe they also have a platform technology. Or there could be a technology company that commercializes instruments and also has a service business. Depending on who you're pitching to, you may want to shift the components of your pitch deck or switch the emphasis. Maybe you want to emphasize the service business for a certain audience versus your commercialization of certain instruments. And so you really need to think about what you're pitching and why. And then I think it's probably becoming obvious through this discussion that you're not going to have one pitch deck. And in fact, I would recommend that you have a master slide deck, which you then can pull slides from, and you can rearrange your pitch deck to fit, the audience that you're speaking to. The other thing I would say as a piece of advice is if you are going to be speaking to multiple parties and your pitch deck is changing, to have a folder system where for each party that you speak with, that you save the pitch deck and the date so that you can refer back to know what you told them. And as your story evolves, you're going to need to update them. And so it's really important that you keep track of what you've pitched to each party. And then, so we can go to the next slide, please. And then finally, how you're pitching is also quite important. So you could be at an investor meeting where you're only going to have 10 to 15 minutes in front of a broad audience. It could be that you are in a one-to-one partnering situation like at Bio. And so, how the amount of detail you might include would be different. And I'll talk later about this, but I would like to say right now that if it's a live presentation versus a tape presentation, we're living in a realm now of tape presentations, and it allows investors to go back and go through your slides again if they've missed something and go through your presentation again. If you're in a live presentation, and if you only have 10 to 12 minutes to talk, the slides need to have only the detail that someone can absorb in that amount of time. It's very difficult if you have a lot of detail on your slide and you're only taking 30 seconds to go through the slide. And the audience can't listen to you and read all of that detail. So you have to really be aware that they're having to grasp in the moment what you're presenting. And finally, I just wanted to make a comment about you've probably heard of an elevator pitch. It's called that because it's about 30 seconds long. It's the time you might spend in an elevator with someone. And it's really important that you maybe create a paragraph of a few sentences that you can get through in 30 seconds. To talk about who you are, your company's mission, and the value proposition, and have that memorized or in your mind, so that when you have a chance meeting or have brief interactions at meetings, you can give your elevator pitch and make an impression. And so, next slide, please. So let's move on to the elements of a pitch deck. The first 4 bullets on this slide: the problem, the solution, the reason to believe in your solution, and differentiation from competition, really comprise your value proposition. and I recommend that you start with those slides, and I'll talk more about this on the next slide. The other components, your intellectual property, your market, your development plan, I'll talk more about that, go-to-market strategy. And then some people like to include, depending on their stage, an accomplishments and next step slide. And it's important to have a slide on the company which shows the founders, the operators, and you might need 2 slides here if you have a board and advisors that you want to include. But when you in your company slide, it's important to have a picture, the title, how, if they're an operator in the company, what are they doing in the company, and then also maybe include some of the key accomplishments of each of the founders and operators of the company. And you don't want it to be too crowded, and that's why you might want to have a second slide if you want to have your advisory boards and your board of your company also in the presentation. Could we go to the next slide, please? So I always recommend leading with the value proposition, because especially if you're in a meeting where you only have 10 to 15 minutes, because you need to capture the attention of the investors. I'm sorry? Oh, the attention of the investors in the first few slides, so that they want to hear more, so that they want to hear about the development plan, the IP, and the rest of the details that are very important, but they need to care about it right up front. And so, first you talk about the burning platform. What is the problem? So why is it a problem? And, who is it a problem for? And that last one's really important because that leads you to who your customers are. And so is it physicians? Is it payers, patients? Who is the, who is it a problem for? And then, what is your solution? And so you have to get very quickly to and clearly to how it addresses the critical issue just outlined in the slide before on the problem. As far as reason to believe, if you have some key compelling data that's easy for a general audience to understand, and I'm talking about a pitch to a broad audience here, that they need to have a reason to believe what you're saying, that your solution can actually do what you're saying it can. And then finally, the fourth bullet is a piece that is often missing from pitch presentations, and that is the competition slide, and then why you're better than the competition. This needs to, so basically, it's not just the current therapy that you're competing against, but you also need to have done a landscaping exercise to see what else is in development, so that at your time of launching your product, what does that landscape look like? And so, because this is important and will relate to what share of market that you can expect to attain. So if there are 3 other competitors and you aren't differentiated, then that's a little more difficult than if you can make a case for, our product differentiates from the competition, the other products that will be in the market when we launch. Next slide, please. So as far as the market is concerned, I'm often asked, how much market information do I need to have? And so if it's a very early stage company, on the left, I've outlined pieces that I think are very helpful to have in your deck. So who is the customer or customers? If you can obtain some structured voice of customer information, and by that I mean that if you can go and do structured interviews so that you can capture the information. So, 4 out of 5 physicians said that they would use our product rather than the existing product. That kind of information is very important in understanding if you're, how important your solution is and if it's differentiated. Sometimes it's important to include the patient journey. And then the market opportunity, it's nice to be able to have an idea of what share of market you expect to attain based on your differentiation. If someone asks you for a top level forecast, if you have some pricing information, then it's easy to do that. For a later stage company, it is expected that you will, if there's reimbursement, you'd have feedback from payers and you'd have more information, more detailed information, a detailed forecast, pricing, sales. And so certainly the later stage company will need to include much more detailed, harder numbers than the early stage company. But I do think there's still important market information for the early stage company to include. We can go to the next slide, please. So The development plan is a really critical slide and one that's worth spending time creating. It puts a lot of key information into one graphic. So you would have a timeline with the embedded activities. If it's a therapeutic, you would have the clinical plan, regulatory milestones. You would have your CMC, your toxicology, and how those are all moving along in time, what the costs are, and what your current funding is able to fund, as well as what kind of future funding you need. Where are the potential exit points? And so it's a really data-rich slide. I do want to mention that if you're pitching to a broad audience and you're not certain that your audience is 100% comprised of accredited investors, in this slide, you can show what you're going to need money for without having to say, we are raising $3 million for X or $10 million by this time. Because that last statement I just made could be considered a general solicitation, and if there are non-accredited investors, it could be that's when it could be considered a general solicitation. So, if you have 100% accredited investors, then you could make the statement of what you're raising. But if you aren't 100% sure, you can show in this slide how much money you're going to need to get to the next inflection point or to get to your exit. Next slide, please. So just going to the style points now. So this is really just focused on if you're doing like a 10 to 15 minute pitch. You'll want to have 20-point font or greater. Your title should usually be at least 32. In fact, I don't usually use titles. I usually advise that the header of each slide should be a descriptive statement, such that if you read each of those headers in succession, it would actually tell you the whole story of your pitch. Using more images, especially images that bring the problem to life, are really important. Very few words, because you want the audience to focus on you, not on you don't want them reading the slides, and that you want them to listen to what you're saying. And have a reading deck ready to send right after the pitch presentation if it's requested of you. You're just trying to pitch and get to a second meeting where you can talk about your company in detail. So if you can go to the next slide. So speaking of a reading deck, essentially, it's a little more difficult if you're reaching out to strategics and VCs by email. So you aren't able to give your oral presentation. So in this case, you need to include enough detail that they can understand. It's a little bit of a delicate balance because you have to have enough detail to ensure comprehension without them being awash in detail and just closing the deck. They're getting hit with a lot of opportunities all the time, and you need to think of ways to make your story stand out. So again, I'll emphasize value proposition. Spend time on those first few slides where it's the problem and your solution and why you should believe and how we're differentiated. And so if you go to the next slide, please. So this was just a quick whirlwind through pitching, and there are entrepreneurs in residence who can coach you on your pitch deck, both through the NIA, NHLBI, and the seed office. And I'd really encourage you to reach out if you need help with your pitch decks, because I know that this was very quick, and the pitch deck organization is situational for meetings for each company, and so one-to-one coaching can really be useful. And I'll hand it back to Monique.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who submitted their questions. I'm going to go through some of the questions that we have received thus far, but as I mentioned earlier, if you would like to submit a question, there's still opportunity. You can click that QA feature at the bottom. You should see that on our screen of what that looks like, and then we'll try to get to your question during the session. We're doing a brief Q&A period, and then we'll move to the presentation for those who join late. So, Diane, can you please tell us what should we avoid when giving a pitch? We talked a lot about what to do, but what shouldn't we do?
I think one thing that I think is not effective is to lead with the market slide, to have that as your first slide, because I think that it can seem that it can be very impressive if you have a good market, but that's not usually the best strategy. So I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't forget to include your, please have a competition slide, do your landscaping analysis, because that is the number one thing that I see missing from slide decks. And it is critical that you've done that. And so I think, and I've also kind of covered not having so much detail that your audience is awash in that and they totally miss your point. So those would be the three things I would highlight.
Thank you. You talked about the reading deck, which was very, very helpful. What additional slides should be in that reading deck? If you could just go over that a little bit more. And when it comes to the actual pitch deck, how do you do that balance between the technical information that is going to be compelling and get them to want to get to the reading deck?
Right. So typically you only have 1 to 2 slides available to you for if you're in a 10 to 15 minute presentation for data. I think the most important thing is to pick the data that you feel is again most compelling, that it really, the one that really shows, or the 2 pieces of data that really show that your solution is going to work. One thing I think that's really important, if there are comparators, if you can show comparator data, because you'll be asked for that. So if when you're running your initial experiments, if you can include comparators in your experiments, that can be quite compelling. As far as the reading deck, at that point, you could add a few more slides of data. If you're just sending a reading deck to someone, you don't want it to be too long, but you could get a little bit of more data in there. But again, I think if you can really edit yourself and think about what's really going to drive this point home, and have 1 to 2 slides, again, comparator data is really important. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. So the business plan is important as well. And we have some of our participants who want to know, do you have any suggestions? Like, where do you come up with the numbers for the business plan and setting those realistic numbers, as well as are there any resources to help shape the financial aspects of the pitch deck?
So I think that you could certainly work with, I recommend, if possible, to work with someone with commercial expertise. So I often see slide decks where the total addressable market is included, and then the pricing is done, and the market that's shown is the total addressable. Basically, the forecast is based on total addressable market, which you're not going to achieve. And so I think if you can work with someone with some business experience on voice of customer, and then figuring out on your differentiation and getting to a realistic share of market. And then there are ways to look at information that's commercial information that's out there to have some kind of a top level pricing estimate. And then you can produce a top level forecast, with someone who has some business training. And so if you can hire a consultant to help you with that, I would highly recommend it. It wouldn't take that much time, and it's worth its weight in gold. And what was the second part, Monique? I'm sorry.
If there are any online resources or even books or things places people can go for additional help.
I think certainly you can search online. I would really recommend that you reach out to the EIRs if you need assistance, and we can help you with more information. And also potentially connect you with someone to help you with your commercial analysis.
Thank you. I've been watching the participant list, and I recognize that some people joined a little bit later than the start. And so at the beginning of the webinar, we talked about how NIA and NHLBI are offering entrepreneurs in residence. And so these are specialists who can help answer and support you on those entrepreneur-focused questions. And we'll be chatting out that contact information in case that is something of interest to you. That is a feature that is available to NHLBI and NIA awardees. If you are not yet an awardee, you can also reach out to us to learn some general information about the program, and we'll share those contacts with you as well. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
And also, folks, we're going to also chat out the feedback form. So If you want to see additional topics or things in the future to help support your business, please fill out that feedback form and tell us. It's really important. All right, Diane, back on. A few other questions. So there are many different types of investors, and some of our audience members are just wondering, do they have to customize their pitch to speak to those investors? And they're thinking sometimes they're small investors. There also may be VC versus family and angel. How do they speak to those different audiences?
Through the pitch deck, you mean? Is that what you're?
Yes. Yeah.
So as I was saying in the presentation, what's most important is to think about what is important to them. So, for a venture capital firm, so in today's realm, a venture capital firm is probably more interested in a broad technology platforms, a pipeline of products than they are in a single therapeutic. And so if you can tailor, if you fit that mold, then you want to tailor your presentation to what they care about. So I think it's important to kind of get feedback, if you can, from a few VCs, from strategics in the environment, today's environment, as to what they most care about. From the perspective of strategic partners, clearly they often have on their website what their focus is. So it's really important to actually go do your homework with regard to strategics. For VCs, you can also look at their current portfolios. What are they investing in? And it'll give you an idea. But I think talking to them about, hey, just at a high level, what are you investing in? What are your priorities? That will help you to tailor your pitch deck to what they care about. Because, again, it's the messages to that you're trying to get the customer in, or the investors interested. And so you really need to have an idea of what they are looking for.
Thank you. And we're going to take 2 more questions and then move on to our next presenter. And so I really appreciate some of the comments that our participants have shared. There are different types of folks in different stages. And, this speaks to, we talked about, how do you prepare for the investor, but it's also, how do we think about ourselves as different kinds of business owners? There are folks who may be more introverted and timid, and they've been focused on lab research and have a great idea, but may not be as comfortable in terms of that extrovert presentation. If you have any tips for them, as well as, do we need to think about how do we do things differently as women and minority-owned business owners to show that, they are viable candidates? There's some comments about whether women and minority business owners get the same level of VC funding as others. And so that's something on the mind of our participants, if you have any tips for them.
Okay, so first, with regard to people who are more introverted scientists, I was one of those. And so I encourage you to practice. You'll do a great job if you have a good pitch deck. You can get your in your mind, get very clear what you're trying to get across. Practice in front of others. You will be able to do a good job on it. But I think that, getting help from others, especially people that maybe have some business training, to make sure you have a good deck is going to go a long way to allowing you to have a good presentation. On the other hand, if you're a faculty founder, for instance, and you're going to have other operators in your company, then perhaps if you really feel that they would do a better job representing the company, then by all means let them pitch. So I think, but I do think that everyone can learn to give a good pitch presentation. It just takes a lot of practice. And I think as far as women and minorities, honestly, I think there is much more interest in making sure that we begin to bring forward women and minority owned or founded businesses now. I think when I was coming up, it was pretty difficult, but I do think that there's more interest in being supportive. So I would try to go in just with the assumption that I am being looked at like any other business person, and have that in your frame of mind. Because if you go in within the frame of mind that they might not want to look at me because I'm not, I'm a female, or it's a minority-owned business, go in your frame of mind, and what you project is so important to how people perceive you. I think having a good mindset is probably the best, and a positive mindset is probably the best advice I can give.
Thank you so much, Diane. I just want to also note that NIH has been taking a lot of steps in this front through Unite, as well as NIA has also rolled out some specific efforts to incorporate more diverse teams and support diverse entrepreneurs, from events to actual resources. So please stay tuned to some of the NIA website updates that we'll be posting and potential programs in the future. With that, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. If you did not hear your presentation, your question answered, please note that we have them and we'll be incorporating additional questions throughout the presentation and at the end. Thank you. With that, I'd like to welcome Ryan Wagner. He is from Ogilvy Health, and he'll be walking through how to promote your company. And I may chime in with some additional tips as well.
Thanks very much, Monique. Good afternoon, everyone. As Monique said, my name is Ryan Wagner, and I'm excited to be here today to give some thoughts on promoting your brand with a focus on social and traditional media. Next slide, please. The first thing that I would say at the outset is that regardless of what stage you are in as a brand, whether it's the academic research phase, the startup at the beginning of growth, or a small company with pipeline progress, you are, regardless of circumstance, still at a critical moment in your evolution as a brand, because you'll only be a blank canvas once in the eyes of the public. It's critical that you take the time to define and to promote your brand on your terms, because if you don't, ultimately others will step in and fill that void for you, and they will characterize you, whether it be competitors, media, other influencers in the space. And so I would encourage you to take the time to think about the value of externally promoting your brand through social and traditional media. I would also say that just in terms of the broader industry and societal perspective, now is a great time to capture the attention and imagination of key audiences. In terms of the life sciences and biotech industries, certainly these days, absolutely front and center on the world stage, with the true value and the importance of those industries gaining the attention of the general public. And what that means is that a lot of stakeholders, including media, are paying attention. And now is a wonderful time to be introducing yourself to them and telling your story. So what I'd like to do today is spend a few minutes talking about how you can tell your story through external communications in a way that is done strategically, thoughtfully, and efficiently. And what I mean by that is strategically, it's about how to use the right channels to reach the right audiences at the right time. In terms of thoughtfully, what I mean by that is that story and narrative matters. It's important to talk thoughtfully about what your brand stands for, what your brand is about. And I'll give some considerations on how to create that narrative. And then in terms of communicating efficiently, I recognize that external communications is not your day job. You have an incredibly full calendar of other things to do, and you might not necessarily see communications as being something that can easily be worked into your daily routine. And I've got some thoughts on how you can go about accomplishing that as well. So if we go to the next slide, the elements of a communications infrastructure. The ultimate goal that we're looking at here is to be able to create a mechanism that you can stand up so that on a regular basis, you can scan the media landscape to look for opportunities, identify the reporters that you want to engage with. And then when you've identified those reporters, you'll already have the tools and the content necessary to engage those media influencers and elevate not only your company and that brand, but also your personal brand as well as a thought leader in your industry. And we'll do that by creating a very compelling and a strong narrative and consistent messaging, and also using that narrative and messaging to build up your digital presence and create content and thought leadership. And by digital presence, I mean social media channels as well as website. And then finally, we'll leverage traditional media relations engagement. And that can take the form of many different avenues. The first being paid and sponsored content, which is a great way to put a stake in the ground and define your brand as you're just sort of going out into the broader industry. News bureau, and by that I mean sort of the day-to-day block and tackle of identifying reporters that you want to engage with. And then using desk sides, which is sort of an industry term that we like to use. And it's basically your opportunity to introduce yourself to key members of the media, make that introduction and educate them about the story of your brand and the value that you're bringing to the industry and the work that you're doing. And also creating content calendars, recognizing that over the course of a quarter or 2 quarters or a year, you're going to have several moments in time that are critical to drive visibility around, to make sure that you're, again, defining your brand publicly and using all the channels at your disposal to do so. And then finally, as one of those moments in time, the importance of event participation as an opportunity to, before, during, and after that event, promote your brand. You can move to the next slide. What is narrative? So essentially, before going out to externally communicate your brand, you've got to sort of get your internal story straight first, right? So it's about creating your story and your narrative. And the way that I like to think of narrative is a succinct story that forms the basic framework for all of your communications. It's the benchmark of your external communications. Everything can build and be tweaked and based on that true narrative. And so, I think that a really strong narrative and the best kinds of narratives follow sort of the classic story arc. So you begin with the challenge. What is happening in society that needs fixed? What is the unmet need that my brand and I are researching and working to solve or to address? The hero. Why is your business, why is your brand the very best suited to address this challenge? What makes you unique? The journey. What are you doing right now to directly take on these challenges and resolve them? And then finally, what is the outcome? What is your vision, your aspirations? What do you hope to achieve as a brand? And again, like I said, your brand needs to be flexible enough to be used across all sorts of different communications channels. And ultimately, over time, it can be customized with stories, anecdotes, facts, and case studies, but it should really serve as your sort of default go-to, an extended elevator pitch, if you will. And it's the basis that everything else is added on to. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the various areas in which your narrative will be part of your communications infrastructure. It'll be used to, again, as a consistent foundation to tell your story across all these different avenues, whether it's earned media with reporters, paid media, thought leadership, executive comms, engaging with stakeholders, policymakers, partners, and ultimately the general public. So if you go to the next slide, please. So once you've sort of established what your story is and what your narrative is, then it's a question of how do we go out to promote your brand externally? And a lot of people ask the question, a lot of young companies ask the question, is social media right for me? Should I be involved in social media? Does it make sense? The answer to that question, simply put, is absolutely. Social media is a phenomenal place to start to externally communicate the value of your brand, because quite simply, it's where your audiences already exist and it's where they already spend a lot of time. As you can see here, nearly half of the global population actively uses social media platforms. And in fact, recently, Pew Research Center came out with information that says that social media users check their accounts at least once per day, many checking them several times a day. So this is the place to reach your key audiences. But more important than that, as again, you are a blank canvas and you're just introducing yourself to external audiences, social media allows you to control the narrative. It allows you to tell the story of your brand on your terms. The timing, the tone, the messages, the channels, all of that is within your control as you use your social media channels. Unlike traditional media, that I'll talk about in a few minutes, where you have to first convince a reporter that your brand and your company is worth talking about, and then have it go through the lens of an editor and others on the editorial side of the equation. Social media allows you to engage and grow your community on your timetable and through the channels that are most compelling and interesting and work well to reach your audiences. So as we go to the next slide, and we look at what social media channels make the most sense, it's safe to assume that not all channels are created equal. Different channels have their own advantages, and different social media channels lend themselves better to different kinds of engagement. The two that I'd like to focus on today that I think are the most relevant are Twitter and LinkedIn. Twitter is an excellent tool for quick, timely updates to engage with the wider innovation community. It's a way to follow media and engage with media and commenting on media stories that you see in industry trades that might be of interest to you and others in your ecosystem. It's an excellent way to give real-time news and announcements. Again, very quick, a total of 280 characters normally. But what also Twitter is very good at is actually cross-promoting. Twitter is an excellent cross-promotional tool because what it can do is put out quick little announcements that drive the folks following you on Twitter to other channels where those followers can then go more in depth. And the one that I think is most important for the purposes of entrepreneurs and small businesses is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is really the best place to sort of showcase yourself as a thought leader, an innovator, and to promote your company and your science. If you go to the next slide, I will say that LinkedIn is sort of the classic home base of social channels. It's a way that you can go in depth and provide real content and commentary on top trends and hot topics in the industry. LinkedIn is a phenomenal recruiting tool. It's a way to engage with possible add-ons and hires to your company. And it's also a place that can really house all of the key company stats live there for people to see. It's the professional face of your brand on social channels. And it's a channel that can really help you build a lot of credibility across the industry. The copy for LinkedIn can be very flexible. It can take the form of full-length articles or tweet-like call to actions. It allows for great visuals. You can include images and videos to get more eyeballs on what it is you're commenting on. Not necessary for every post, but certainly an attractive add-on if possible. And again, the tone for LinkedIn is one of professional and insightful, the giving and taking of knowledge. And the way that I would sort of compare LinkedIn to some other channels is that, well, I think a lot of people spend time on Facebook, for example. People invest time on LinkedIn because LinkedIn is the channel where you really focus on your career and your professional endeavors. And that's where you want a lot of your social media engagement to broader audiences to be. So if we go to the next slide, in addition to social media, similar to social media, paid and sponsored channels and content is a fantastic tool for brands that, again, don't yet have a lot of name recognition, but are looking to generate some. And one of the things that we've learned over recent years is that, in particular with a lot of online industry outlets, the lines between paid news, paid content, and regular news articles have blurred somewhat. You could be reading an online outlet and you could think you're reading sort of a standard news article, but really it is a piece of paid or sponsored content. And that makes it sort of more acceptable to use paid media these days than it used to be. There used to be a clear separation between the two. And there are also different ways to use paid and sponsored media. Podcasts, as I'm sure you're aware, have become enormously popular. And podcasts are a wonderful tool to use at early stages in your brand evolution. Because of the conversational style of podcasts, it lends itself really well to explaining what you're doing. It allows you to tell your story, provide anecdotes, and really go in depth to talk about your products, your science, your discoveries, your research. It's just a wonderful way to engage with audiences. And again, this can take the form of paid and sponsored packages that you can leverage with a lot of the outlets that are shown on the slide to the right-hand side. Also, native articles, again, look and feel a lot like regular news articles, but they're not. And supplements tend to look more like advertisements. It's sort of the more traditional thing that you would think of when you think of paid ads. But having said that, they still provide the benefit of having deep and controlled content inserted into national publications or major industry magazines to get eyeballs on your brand as you're just starting to introduce yourself. And again, what social media does, as well as paid and sponsored, is it allows you, as you're defining yourself, to control the message. You're not relying on someone else to define your brand. You're doing it for yourself, which is a lot of the advantage of going out early with these particular ways of doing that. Having said that, if we go to the next slide, ultimately, you do want to get involved with traditional media. And there are some basic sort of tried and true approaches to beginning your relationship with traditional media. I like to think of it as being first your own wide angle lens and then your arms and legs. And the process that I would recommend is first begin by scanning the industry media landscape. Identify the reporters that you look to on a regular basis, the ones that you read to understand what's going on in your industry, and the ones that you know are influential and carry the interest of others in your ecosystem. and then reach out to those reporters and offer them a chance to hear your narrative, and more importantly, offer your expertise to them and your point of view on key industry trends that are taking place in the industry, separate and apart from necessarily your brand, just your commentary on the industry, because ultimately what that's going to allow you to do is not only educate reporters about your brand, but be a resource for their future stories. You want reporters to be writing trend stories, 2, 3, 6 months down the line, and think of you as someone they want to reach out to get a good quote to insert into their stories. So again, you want to begin slowly. You want to start small, but start, and use this as an opportunity to position yourself as a resource for reporters and build that relationship. Because ultimately then, as you go to the next slide, you'll see that as you use that relationship, you'll get into a place where you'll have really hard news that you're going to want to communicate to reporters. And that's where you already kind of want them to have a file on you. They want to have some experience with you going back, so that when you're announcing hires and staffing, partnerships and collaborations that you're really proud of, pipeline milestones, major funding announcements, all of those things. That's where you already want those relationships with key media to be in place. So then you can leverage them. And then you don't have to go about the process of educating them from the start. They already have a sense of what your brand is about and what your aspirations are. They've already heard your overarching narrative. And now you can just get directly to the news of the day that you're trying to communicate and build visibility around. And you can also use those moments in time on the calendar to promote your news across your website, of course, social media channels, as I've talked about, but also look out to other brand ambassadors, people who have their own social networks and have their own spheres of influence. Leverage those folks to talk about your news on your behalf, because while it's certainly wonderful to be promoting your own news, there's more value oftentimes in having somebody else promoting your news for you. And you can also use a number of vendors that can be very helpful. Business Wire for press releases, Cision as well. Those are vendors that you can work with to set up distribution channels so that your press release hits all the key audiences. And you can also make sure that using those vendors, you can track how much coverage and how much attention those press releases are getting. So you've got a sense of how you can change those metrics to get the most out of every single piece of content that you're putting out over the course of a calendar year. And then finally, going to the next slide, we come to event participation, which is one of those moments in time on the calendar that really provide a lot of value for maximizing your brand externally, because you have the ability with events to really pitch and promote the brand before, during, and after, right? You can leverage social channels to let all of your key influencers know that you're going to be participating at an event beforehand and drive attendance and eyeballs to your presentation. During the event itself, you can leverage those media relationships that I talked about and set up one-on-one meetings and on-sites with reporters who might be in attendance to talk about the various things that you were presenting at the event. And then after the event, you can create some wonderful thought leadership pieces that tell others who maybe weren't able to attend the event what your key takeaways were from that event and that conference. And again, that just positions you again as a wonderful resource, a go-to for reporters and also for other thought leaders in the industry to continuously check in with your social channels to see what you're commenting on next so that they can get smarter about the industry as well. And then you can also, of course, complement all of those different kinds of promotions, if possible, with video. Video is a wonderful tool to use at events to sort of take your presentation and promote it across social channels following the event, because that gives people the opportunity to view it, not in real time, but still in completion. So with that, those are the elements that I wanted to touch on today. And I hope that was helpful and useful, and I'm looking forward to any questions that might pop up.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I just wanted to add a piece to the event. It's a wonderful way to merge social and your on the ground or virtual presentation, because you can actually be a part of some of the event conversations. If you're looking at, for example, trying to attract a particular type of HCP audience, or depending on who your market is, you can actually follow the event hashtags and make comments bringing in that hashtag so that other people who are following that event will see what you have to say. So we've seen some growth with new followers and people who will be attracted to a biotech, for example, with that approach, and then a way to engage new audiences. So don't underestimate not only your physical or virtual presence at an event, but the broader way to connect on social as well. Ryan, there's a couple questions that have come through, and I know I'm watching time, so I want to make sure that we leave time for our discussion as well. But how a biotech is a small number of employees sometimes, and we have some questions of how do we find time to get to this, because we're focusing on the science, we're trying to get funding. How important is this, and how do we get it done with a small staff?
Right, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's a difficult one to answer in the sense that there are only so many hours in a day. But the way that I would recommend going about it is that as folks who are in the industry, it goes without saying that you probably take the time to read the industry trades, to know what your competition is doing, to know what other innovations are happening in the space, whether it's endpoints, fierce biotech, biopharma, whatever, the particular industry trades that you follow are. As you're doing that as part of your regular routine, just for your own edification, make mental notes of the reporters that you see as being truly influential and follow the stories that they're covering. So that then, for example, when you go to introduce yourself to them and tell them your narrative, you can reference a recent story they've written and establish the relationship fairly quickly. I think when it comes to social media, again, it doesn't have to be a tremendously heavy lift. It doesn't have to take up a huge chunk of your day, but every day, if you're going through the industry trades that you would read normally and you see an article that's of interest to you, it's probably of interest to others in your industry. And so you can flag it. You can put out a very quick tweet, a 2-sentence tweet about it, or a very brief LinkedIn post saying, hey, everyone, saw this wonderful article, thought you would enjoy it too. Those little things that really don't take up that much time can begin to create a pipeline of content going across your social channels, and gradually it can expand your network. And I think what you'll start to see is the return on that investment, because attention begets attention. If you ultimately make the investment to get media coverage, that can attract the attention of potential partners down the road. So it really is an investment in time.
Yeah. And also, if you are publishing something or have new data that you want to share with the public and you don't have a media outlet to pick that up yet, you can report about that on yourself through your social channels. So that's something to consider. And also, media are often looking for experts, as Ryan mentioned earlier. So you can either email them or also message them, DM them, direct message on social media as well. I'd also just want to flag, so you heard earlier some comments about the pitch deck, not including any financials or things that you're not ready to share with the public. But it is important to think about some of those same elements of, why is this product important? What is different about it? To create a little bit of a digital front door to your company, because investors as well as media, people who want to learn more may look you up. And time and time again, we've seen that sometimes you go to a website and it's like, I don't even know what they do. You're really trying to get to, what is this? How does it change my life? How will it change others' lives? So think about some of the comments that Diane mentioned earlier. Again, not including things that you don't want the public to know about, because, or if you're going to publish something that you're not ready to share yet, don't put that there yet. But just to really put some of the key information about who you are, what you're working on, who your team is, and how your product is going to improve health. Mm-hmm. I'm watching our time, so I'm going to move us on to our next speaker. And I'm delighted to welcome Diane Reinhart and Guy Mansueto. I want to thank all of our speakers thus far. If you would stick around in case there are additional questions at the end, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Monique. Guy, welcome. So all of you, we're in for a real treat. Sometimes when you think about where the rubber hits the road, you talk about people that are doing it in action and some of the things they've experienced and what we can take away and learn from them. But this is a great opportunity to be with my colleague, Guy Mansueto, and I've asked him to introduce his wide variety of experiences. And I know we have a diverse audience, and some of us refer to CMO as Chief Medical Officer or Chief Science Officer, but a Chief Marketing and Strategy Office role is a very important leadership role. So, Guy, take it away and introduce us to you and sort of some of your background so they can appreciate your perspective. And then I only have a couple questions for you, but I know you'll enlighten us.
Great. Thanks, John. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. As John indicated, my name is Guy Mansueto. I have over 25 years experience in healthcare IT, across product marketing, strategy at investor-backed companies such as Polaris, Great Health Partners, and Bain Capital. I've led high-growth solutions in provider, payer, employer markets with solutions in EMRs, population health, analytics. at previous companies such as Allscripts, Vital, and IBM Watson Health. And I'm mostly recently responsible for the go-to-market strategy for a cloud-based B2B marketplace that really is tackling the non-labor supply chain in hospitals and healthcare. So glad to be here and glad to help round us out in this discussion.
All right, so let's get right into it. So the first question, we're going to the deep end. How do you predetermine, engage, or evaluate your thoughts on the success of a new product and offering, including determining the product and the market fit? How do you do that?
It's a big question. I think Monique kind of hit on a few elements that I look at. I think many of you probably had an opportunity to watch a show on TV called Shark Tank. And if you're like my wife, you're most interested in what is being pitched and get really excited about some of the solutions that are being brought to market. But what I like to pay attention to is the behavior and the gestures and the communication of the sharks. And while I don't know exactly what's going on in their minds when they're evaluating companies, they're usually thinking about, I would say, a few things: the what and why, the who and the when. So I'm going to start talking about the what and why, and we'll hopefully wrap up with the when. So when I look at companies or products and solutions, I start with the customer, and I usually put the customer hat on first. I tend to represent the market, so I tend to start there. And really understanding the benefits to the customer. There's a lot of founders and entrepreneurs have so much passion for their products and solutions. They'll tend to tell you almost everything they could possibly do. And I would suggest that that's probably likely too much, and your company's value will often get drowned out and lost in translation. So instead, start with kind of what are you being hired to do? And there are many frameworks and tools out there to help evaluate the what. And many of you probably heard of Jobs to Be Done and other frameworks out there, but it really is to help translate the customer's needs and products and the services that they can't live without in their words and their voice of the customer in their eyes. So things to think about with your solutions that you're bringing to market is, if you didn't exist, what do customers use as an alternative today? Are they doing it manually? Are they hiring people? Are they using other technologies? Are they doing nothing? Understanding really kind of where customers are today. 2, understand what you bring to market with your features and capabilities that alternatives do not necessarily competitors, alternatives, things that they're using today. And then think about the value and the benefits that you bring with your company to market. What value and attributes to help enable that value? What are the benefits, in their words, for that value? So once you understand, I'd say the what, the second part is to look at the why. And this is an area I think the sharks spend a little bit of time on, is to understand kind of, what is the challenge your customers are experiencing in the market? What's the pain level? And how large is that pain? Is that pain large enough that they're willing to change? And that change factor usually comes from a marketing standpoint in what we call willingness to pay or propensity to buy. Will they write the check? Will they actually pull out their checkbook and write the check for the solution? So understanding the pain level and the what and will help you kind of get to the next step. So once you understand the what and the why, then most of the sharks, I suspect, spend time on the who. So what customers value that, care a lot about that value? Who are the customers and the markets that you want to get into that really are going to benefit the most? And I would stay super focused. Many companies that I encounter tend to try to do everything for everybody. This is the active market segment that you're trying to get in front of and get as narrow as you can. Think about the relative characteristics, the environment, the behaviors. What makes this group of customers, potentially customers, the most ideal for your solution? And as Diane mentioned, get a realistic share of that market. They're trying to understand how big is that market for your solution. And I think about this when I'm doing a marketing campaign or building sales collateral or whatever I'm trying to do. I tend to think about really what that market is and who we're trying to service with that solution. If you're a small company with less than $1 million of revenue, I don't think often, and there might be some exceptions to this, that you have the resources to typically market to more than one segment. So stay focused on that one segment. Even if you're up to $10 million or higher, a lot of times marketing to 2 or 3 segments may be too many. So think about exactly who you're trying to influence and get in front of. And the who also implies to you and your team. Many of the sharks are looking at you thinking about, hey, can this person really pull this off? Do you have the track record and the team and the support structure to be successful? So hopefully that covers the what and the why and the who. I'll give you one example of that. I worked for a company called Medicus Systems. They were based in Evanston, Illinois, and it was one of my first jobs in the real world, as they say. And they work with hospitals to help determine what, based on the census and severity of patients in the hospital, how do they predict the staffing levels for the nursing staff for the next day? And that was the problem, and there was no easy way to solve it. So what the company really offered was a way to predict that staffing based on the current census and benchmarks it against other hospitals to help optimize resources. So the pain was great. If you got it wrong, if you're understaffed, you couldn't serve patients, it was a big deal. If you're overstaffed, same thing. It's a big implication on your organization. So sizable impact, sizable what, why, and who, and they were highly successful and ultimately got acquired. So long story there, John, but hopefully it gets you started.
No, so that's great. So if we got the what, why, and the who, what do you think is the most important thing in launching a business or a product? I mean, they always say in golf, there's one good swing thought, but so what's the most important thing? Well, Guy and I enjoy a little golf here and there, but what's the most important thing do you think that in launching a business or a product?
Yeah, and I take this from a CEO I worked for many years, but he always used to say the most important thing is business is timing, and it kind of stuck with me, and I thought through my years of experience, and it really came to fruition. Timing is so important. You think about things that we're encountering today every day, like Airbnb, on a personal level. I wonder if Airbnb would have been successful if Uber didn't exist. If people didn't jump into strangers' cars, would people fly across the country and sleep in strangers' houses? I always wonder how much time it would have taken Airbnb to get that ramped up if the precedent wasn't there. So I do think timing matters, and I think it's something that's also probably on the minds of the sharks, is thinking about the when. And I would take time to evaluate this and carefully evaluate it and triple evaluate it. You might be too late in the market, and some cases that's a hard swim. It's usually a replacement strategy, but you could be successful. You just have to think about it. You might be too early. That doesn't mean you just don't go after it, but it has big implications on how you go after the market and you route the market. So let me give you an example. I used to work at a company called Phytel. They were a physician-led population health company out of Dallas. And back in the early days of Phytel, we were going to market with this provider-led population health solution. So, we went to HIMSS, which is the big HIT conference, and had a big 20 by 30 booth. And it said population health all over it. And no one knew what that was. And it wasn't even common language in care delivery model, at least in the US. So while we gave a lot of coffee away in the booths and had a lot of fun, we really didn't get there. So we went back to the drawing board and thought about it, and really need to establish what that meant. What did population health mean in terms of care delivery, in terms of hospital care, physician care? And we needed to seed the market with a mental model on what that was, establish a frame of reference for a category that really just didn't exist in the US. So, we started by building an audience, and we got involved with all the leaders in terms of what population health was, public health was, and how to introduce that in the right way. And we needed to get involved with care delivery strategies and associations that were really on the front lines of that. At the time, it was the Patient-Centered Primary Care Collaborative, which was an association that was focused on patient-centered medical home, which is a way for physician practices to practice population health within their current care delivery and satisfy the triple aim. and all this other great stuff. The bottom line is we needed to get involved and build that category and build that audience, and then introduce the product that we already had to that audience. Once we had a very large, loyal audience, it was fairly easy then to have that direct relationship. And instead of paying for those eyeballs, we basically started sharing strategies that other hospitals, health systems were using. And it was a highly successful way to get in the market. That took about 7 years. So while you would expect it to be at a few years, you could create a category, it takes a lot of time to build something brand new. And you need to typically do it on the coattails of existing things that people are familiar with. So that hopefully rounds out, John, the what, why, who, and when.
So I only got one more question, and I know we're cognizant of your expertise, and we really appreciate it. Is how do you determine what type of marketing to do? What type of marketing is needed? We heard social media, we heard presentations, we heard traditional media. How do you as the budget requester and spender and authorizer and leader, how do you bring that to bear for a team on where the money should go?
Yeah, this is probably the one thing that at this stage of my career I always get called in for, is to look at really what kind of marketing is needed for the company at the stage they're in. And it really depends. Ryan touched on a few concepts on this, but I'll add some additional color. I hate to say it, but it really all depends. And while there's different cars for different needs, minivans, trucks, sedans, hybrids, all built around people's lives, you also need custom marketing to fit around a company and a product in market. You might be selling a very large enterprise solution that takes 6 to 9 months, 12 months to sell with 10 people involved in the deal. That's a different level of strategy in marketing, account-based marketing, content, executive events, solutions to evaluate buying intent. There's a different strategy you need to take to market for enterprise sales compared to a direct-to-consumer solution, which is more social selling, influencer networking, and others. But it really depends. And I would take the time to try to evaluate and bring the right resources to bear to help solve this question for you. Everyone says, well, it really comes down to cost, and I don't have a lot of money. What does that really mean? You could still set up the right structure in multiple different levels and ultimately get at where you need to be in a world-class model over time, and start with a very scrappy approach to down that path. So everything doesn't cost a ton of money. A lot of marketing is just creativity and a little bit of elbow grease, as they say. But it's an important question. And my experience is, when I talk to CEOs who are trying to evaluate, the marketing investment, sometimes it's determining what business they're even in and how they're going to make money. Sometimes it's about bringing the brand promise and value to market and how it's expressed and delivered. Sometimes it's about just executing and developing the organization to execute marketing. So it really depends on kind of what the challenge is and what you're being asked to do, and then it depends on the line of business you're in, the buying dynamics, and the life cycle of the solution you're in as well. So there's no easy solution or no easy answer. I love this question, but it really kind of depends on a whole host of factors. But ultimately, if you get the right size marketing, you will be on the right path for your product and solution going forward.
Well, I'd love to get just some parting thoughts. You live what you preach. You do it every day. You do it in your own initiatives as well as for the corporations that you worked with. You've been very successful at it. So, what's your parting thoughts, words of wisdom that we can all take away?
I would say a couple of things on the just in terms of what you're selling. People buy from who they like, know, and trust. I think that's kind of common, and people are familiar with that. But they also buy for where you're taking them. So as you're pitching, cast a vision. Tell them not only kind of where their experience is going to go, what the solution is going to deliver, but where that's going to wind up. A lot of people are really interested in that future, and or the experience you're leaving with them, especially if it's a consumer product and experience really is reigning supreme at this point. Is what is that experience that you're leaving the patient or individual, and where is that going to go long term? So that your investors or your buyers can make that connection. Don't assume that they know that connection. You're the expert, right? So make sure that they know that that path where you're taking them, and they can see it clearly, so that they get excited as much as you in terms of the solutions you're bringing to market. So hope that helps. That's my parting thoughts.
We all know that starting a business is tough, right? So, sometimes it's just a matter of resiliency, right? So, and getting and working with teams sure makes it fun, but it's a journey, and it has destinations, but it is a journey. So we appreciate your passion. We appreciate your contribution. We appreciate your expertise. I'm going to turn it back to Monique if there's any other unanswered questions from the audience for the panelists. And Guy, hopefully you could stick around a couple more minutes and we'll wrap up any questions.
Will do.
You will just go to 3 questions. I know that there are others, but I did post some of our contact information in case you'd like to be able to ask a few more questions. I did also get some general questions about the SBA NCTR program. There's a link to our website there, as well as just some questions about whether the slides are available. We will send you the slides and send you the link as to where we'll be posting the video when this is available. It'll take a couple weeks, but we need to make it 508 compliant for all different types of screen readers, and we'll get that online so you can come back and access all the nuggets of information here. So we talked about, what should be in a pitch deck, what to communicate. How does a company even go about figuring out how they get that first meeting with a VC? Guy, Diane, do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So as you're looking at investment, a lot of times it really depends on being prepared with the right pitch, the right audience, the right VC. VCs are very similar to you and I. We all have different passions, different interests, different size companies we're looking to invest in or expand, and they're very unique. So think about the types of VCs that you'd like to introduce. Think about what other companies they've invested in and what stage they've invested in those companies, and think about what you're bringing to market and making sure that it kind of matches their portfolio, matches their growth trajectory and how they're thinking about the business and market. So I would suggest thinking about your company first, and then trying to match your company with the right VC or private equity groups.
Thank you. And how can a company protect their IP when they're speaking with potential investors or even the media?
Yeah, do you want me to answer that? Well, put John out there. I will say just two things. You should always have a deck that is, while it might be some confidential information, that one is that you're open to share and you're open to get lost and posted on the internet, right? And that is more of a public, high level. Here's what the company is really trying to solve. It doesn't go into any, proprietary details, and it's something you can share with venture capitalists or other investors early stage. Then go, of course, into additional detail. At that point, typically an NDA or standard NDA is part of the process. But make sure you're not leaking information or sharing information you wouldn't share otherwise. So try to stage the number of meetings and presentations that you think you're going to have, and have a short deck with not a lot of proprietary information, and as your intro email, as your intro door opener, if that helps.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our speakers here today. And good news is that we do have a tremendous resource in the Entrepreneur in Residence program that we have at NIH. So want to make sure that you see those comments and contacts in chat. It's a genuine offer to meet with us. So here's some of the information on how you can connect with the National Institute on Aging. I did want to go back to the slide so you know about the event that's coming up, because there are a lot of questions about investing. I know that's in a lot of people's minds. We're going to have 2 focus sessions all on that. So bring your questions back. Register today. The next event is January 25th. Also, please fill out the feedback form and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. I want to thank all of you for growing with us today. I know this is a lot of work to bring new technologies to market, but has a lot of opportunity for public benefit. We want you to succeed. And so when we say, let's meet one-on-one, we really mean it. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help you. And until next time, we look forward to speaking with you in January 25th. Thank you so much for your time today. And our guest speakers, fantastic job. Thank you.